South Park is a town full of friendly faces everywhere, and today we're ranking every major character from worst to best. This is the South Park tier list. Let's start with the F tier, which includes the worst characters on the show, or character in the case of South Park. Unless you completely forgot about him, which would be fair, you probably already know the bottom spot is going to Pip Pirip. Ever since the show's conception, Pip has been constantly cited as being hated by everyone.
Go away, Pip, nobody likes you.
Not only within the show, but also by the show's audience, and even the staff. I mean, imagine sucking that much! Essentially, Pip served as a nerdy punching bag in the early seasons until Butters came along and replaced him around season 3 or 4. The real problem with Pip is that he's underdeveloped. While the kids picking on him can lead to some funny moments at times, the humor doesn't stem from anything funny within Pip's personality. Unlike Butters, Pip can't really hold his own independently from the rest of the cast, which is probably best exemplified in his solo season 4 episode that's often considered to be one of the worst in a series with well over 300 episodes. And now that we've discussed how much Pip sucks, we can talk about characters who at least have some positive qualities. This is the C tier. We're starting off the C tier with Stuart and Carol McCormick. The heads of possibly the poorest household in South Park, Stuart and Carol are often belligerent, drunk, and violent towards each other, which seems to be the main cause of their many financial woes. While this behavior is very funny a lot of the time, there's a darker subtext to it, mostly pertaining to the negative effects it has on their children, who are portrayed as more mature than their parents, especially Kenny. Out of all the parents of the main 4 boys, Stuart and Carol definitely have the least development. Let's head on over to Marsh territory for a bit to talk about Shelly Marsh, a character who's been around since the beginning of the show and has had varying levels of prominence. Shelly is Stan's aggressive older sister who often beats him up or makes cynical remarks towards her father, almost always in a bad mood.
You're such a piece of shit, Dad!
Shelly is one of the few characters who's almost always seen frowning, even in her idle pose. While Shelly can be funny and even hilarious at times, she has a similar problem as Sheila in the sense that there isn't much variety in the comedy she provides, hence why large stretches of the show's run barely feature her in any capacity. For another member of the Marsh family, Sharon Marsh is next. For a long time, Stan's parents on the show were nothing more than, well, exactly that, Stan's parents. Over the years, Randy's become a lot more comedic, and Sharon has maintained her more grounded nature, often to contrast the craziness caused by her husband. This is a great contrast that works really well as a dynamic, but the reason Sharon ranks kinda low is because, somewhat similarly to Pip, she doesn't really stand on her own that well. Unlike Pip, Sharon has had some decent episodes revolving around her character specifically, but when was the last time you heard South Park fans really clamoring for a new Sharon-centered episode? Still, we do love the classic Halloween episode where she begins hiding dead bodies that she thought were murdered by Stan. But let's talk about another mom, Sheila Broflovsky. Out of all the mothers on and in South Park, Sheila's perhaps the one that's the biggest antagonist.
What?
Comes the closest to being an antagonist, yeah, particularly in the early seasons and South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, with their heavy focus on censorship and, starting a war with Canada. Sheila is loud, annoying, egotistical, self-righteous, has an insufferable personality. She's from New Jersey and never shuts up, but, well, she's all of those things, but that doesn't make her a bad character, as Sheila's antagonistic nature leads to some really great and meaningful conflicts within the series. And on top of Sheila, let's talk about her husband, Gerald Broflovsky. Whereas Sharon acts as the more grounded half of Stan's parents, Gerald could be viewed as the more grounded out of Kyle's paternal figures, at least in the earlier seasons. Gerald is definitely the breadwinner of the family, having a prestigious, high-paying job as a lawyer, which also shows a level of intelligence on his part as well. With all that said, Gerald definitely has a lot of flaws beneath the surface, such as when he gets out of hand as an internet troll, reveals his degenerate gambling addiction, or when he's revealed to be a cat pee addict. This makes Gerald a fun yet inconsistent character as he bounces between grounded and just ridiculous. We've talked a lot about the boys' parents, but now let's get to a staff member of South Park Elementary, that being Peter Charles, better known as PC Principal.
So please welcome PC Principal.
The most recent character to appear on this list, PC Principal's introduced in South Park's 19th season and has maintained prominence in the series ever since. Realizing the world around them was becoming much more politically correct, Matt Stone and Trey Parker created PC Principal as a response to American culture and humor becoming a lot more sanitized from when the show first started.
Why? Are you uncomfortable around people with disabilities?
No, I'm not. I am very not uncomfortable.
The response to PC Principal among South Park fans has been pretty divided, with many considering him to be funny and an accurate commentary, with others seeing him as a one-note joke. And there is some truth to both sides. Personally, we think the development PC Principal's had post-season 19, particularly with his relationship with Vice Principal Strongwoman and the birth of the PC babies, has developed the character in fun and unexpected ways. Now let's get to our only quadruple ranking in our countdown, that being the Goth Kids. These 4, individually known as Michael, Henrietta, Pete, and Ferkel, don't have that much that distinguishes themselves from each other, but that's exactly the point. They all look the same, act the same, and like the same things as each other, which apparently makes them nonconformists in society. The Goth Kids are a fun addition to the show that accurately comment on the subculture they're parodying. However, much like PC Principal, many have argued that they are a one-note joke. Still, we think those critics might just be stupid conformists.
They're all a bunch of Nazi conformist cheerleaders.
But let's round out the C tier with possibly our favorite one-note joke character, that being Scott Malkinson. Another somewhat recent addition to the South Park cast, Scott Malkinson is distinct due to his lisp and repeated statement that he has diabetes. Whenever Scott Malkinson is with the other kids, instead of interacting with him in a meaningful way, most of them mock him in a cruel way. Much like Pip, Scott Malkinson is a nerdy character and doesn't offer much variety in his comedy, but the reason he's so much more endearing is due to the way writers play into those aspects of Scott's character. Later, when he gets his own episode, Scott Malkinson really explores his lack of identity outside of his diabetes, which makes for quite an emotional and hilarious story. What else can we say about him except for, I'm Scott Malkinson, I have diabetes.
You guys all just live on me for having diabetes. I'm Scott Malkinson.
Well, that does it for the C tier, so let's move on up to the B tier. We'll start off the B tier with Wendy Testaburger. Ever since the very first episode of South Park, Wendy's had a prominent role, initially as Stan's love interest and eventually his girlfriend. As the series has continued, Wendy's grown as a distinct character independent from Stan, becoming one of the most mature and sensible kids in the class who always stands up for what she believes and advocates for good causes like breast cancer awareness. Wendy may not be the funniest character, but she does have a lot of great moments, especially when she's pushed to a breaking point by characters like Cartman, who know how to tick her off.
Say something funny, Winnie. We can't wait.
Farting their way into the next spot are Terrence and Phillip. These Canadian TV personalities are the favorite comedians amongst most students at South Park Elementary, despite the fact that their jokes mostly consist of them farting on and swearing at each other. This would lead to them being another one-note joke like the characters we talked about in the C tier, but what really makes Terrence and Phillip stand out is the way they're used to comment on the real-life reactions to South Park itself by people who dismiss it as nothing but pointless, crude humor, especially in South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. The commentary worked even better when Matt Stone and Trey Parker began producing the Canadian series Kenny vs. Benny, which is kind of a live-action version of Terrence and Phillip itself? Also, who can forget the April Fool's Day prank where South Park aired a Terrence and Phillip episode instead of resolving the cliffhanger from season 1? Another character who has been a part of South Park from the very beginning is Leanne Cartman. The mother of Eric, Leanne started the series off being portrayed as a generally sweet mother who was also an enabler that shaped Cartman into the egotistical, selfish jerk he turned out to be. She's also known amongst residents in the town for her promiscuity, having slept with the majority of South Park's men at one point or another, as a jab at Trey Parker's ex named Leanne, who cheated on him in the past. While she started off as a character written out of bitterness by Parker, Leanne has seen a lot of development in recent years, particularly in the way she stands up to Eric's terrible behavior and no longer enables him. This is quite the surprising shift and leads to her being one of the more interesting parents as a result.
Who's got the greatest mom in the world? I do.
Whether we're laughing at her in the early seasons or gaining an odd amount of respect for her in the 26th season. Spreading Christmas cheer into toilets everywhere, the next spot is going to Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Poo. Another character who's been here since season 1, Mr. Hanky was a mainstay in South Park's Christmas episodes for many years, spreading positivity wherever he went. Of course, the joke here is that South Park's most wholesome character was a singing piece of crap, which in itself is pretty funny. However, while a character like Leanne has grown and matured over the decades, Mr. Hanky has definitely regressed to the point where he was kicked out of the town for his Twitter rants and became the antagonist of a South Park video game. Even so, we can't forget all the memories Mr. Hanky's brought us over the years, to the point of him making a Christmas album which many listen to even to this very day. Howdy ho! Now let's get to a character that isn't a piece of crap in any way, that being Token Black. No, his name isn't Token. What are you, racist? Anyway, Token started off as a background character in early seasons, but over the years has grown to be one of the more recognizable kids in the show. He's often portrayed as the most mature kid in his class, being a straight-A student who almost never succumbs to the juvenile situations around him. It's true that his race is often used by Cartman for his bigoted remarks, but even then, Token never lets that get him down or make him antagonistic like, say, Kyle, Wendy, or Kenny might often have happen. His family is also the richest family in South Park, showing that hard work, perseverance, and intelligence run in Token's blood. A character who isn't defined by his maturity, though, is Craig Tucker. Hey, did you just flip me off? Craig Tucker. In the early seasons of the show, Craig is portrayed as one of the rudest children in the class, often flipping people off, including his friends, teachers, and even his own family. This leads to him usually getting in trouble, since he can often be seen waiting outside of the principal's office, which is hilariously contrasted by his deadpan voice and ambivalent attitude.
That true, Craig? You a troublemaker?
No.
In recent years, Craig has calmed down quite a bit, even becoming the boyfriend to Tweak, who he once fought in an earlier episode. I bet if Craig knew he was ranked in the B tier amongst other great characters in this show, he'd be
So happy.
Next up is Clyde Donovan, another character who's been around since season 1 and has had a lot of development throughout the years.
Nice.
Clyde, much like Craig, is known for his distinct voice and funny personality. Unlike Craig, though, who's often portrayed as a tough bully, Clyde is much more sensitive, as shown by the fact that he often sobs uncontrollably when he's upset. He's not particularly intelligent, as shown by his belief that 2 times 5 equals 12, and his willingness to buy into ridiculous conspiracies even as an adult. If you really need a character to top the B tier off, though, don't forget to bring a towel. That's right, we're talking about Towley. Voiced by the great and underrated Vernon Chatman, who created Wonder Chosen and Xavier Renegade Angel, Towley was initially conceived as a character that no one could possibly care about due to how lame he is conceptually. How could a talking towel that smokes pot be anything but a one-off gag in a single episode? Of course, all these years later, Anatoly is considered a favorite amongst many fans, and we bet any South Park fan who partakes in the same green substance that he does may have many of Tally's quotes memorized by heart.
I have no idea what's going on.
Granted, not every Tally episode is a home run. I'm looking at you, A Million Little Fibers, but his many great appearances make up for that easily. That does it for the B tier, so let's head straight into the A tier. These characters may not be our absolute favorites, but they're close. We're starting off the A tier with another double ranking, this time for Linda and Steven Stotch. These are the only parents outside of the main 4 boys who are included on this countdown, mostly due to their prominence and how hilarious they are.
You made a goofy face.
No, that's just what I look like.
Butters is one of the most traumatized kids in South Park, and we totally understand why from watching his interactions with Steven and Linda. This strict, no-nonsense couple will ground Butters for pretty much anything, emotionally and sometimes physically abuse him, and even attempt or straight up commit murder if they're really pushed to a breaking point.
It's okay, baby. Mommy will be with you very soon.
Steven and Linda are, bar none, some of the craziest characters in the series, and would undoubtedly be in the F tier if we were ranking them on their morals. Due to how funny they are, though, they land firmly in the A tier, just for this ranking at least. Let's move on to Ike Broflovsky. I believe the youngest character in our rankings. Ike is the adopted Canadian brother of Kyle, who attends kindergarten at South Park Elementary. Ike is possibly the cutest character on this list, which makes it even funnier when his personality is offset by things like his swearing, vaping, or even having an affair with a teacher. He and his older brother have had a tumultuous relationship in the past, with Kyle kicking Ike for following him to school or disowning his brother for finding out that he's adopted. As the years have gone by, Ike and Kyle's relationship has become a lot more loving, which has led to some very sweet moments throughout the series. Ike is a great mix of adorable and hilarious, leading him to an easy A tier spot. Timmy. Oh, okay, we'll do it in English. If you couldn't guess, we're talking about Timmy Birch.
You ready, Timmy?
From the outside looking in, some might wonder how a character who is mostly known for only saying his name repeatedly could possibly be considered a great character, let alone one this high up on our countdown. However, even if someone doesn't watch South Park, there's a good chance they'll know exactly what you're referencing if you shout Timmy's name randomly. If you went to middle school in the late 90s to early 2000s, you've probably heard Timmy shouted in every conceivable situation imaginable. Timmy is a disabled child who is wheelchair-bound and apparently mentally handicapped, although that later point is arguable considering he also is living a lie on occasion. But despite this, he never wants to be treated as anything but another one of the kids. Oh my god, dude, this next spot's totally going to tweak. Okay, sorry, we got a bit excited. The most highly stressed character in South Park, to say the least. Tweak often screams, can never sit still, and overreacts to just about everything due to his high coffee intake, which is revealed to be spiked with methamphetamine. While originally appearing in the Season 2 episode Gnomes, Tweak slowly grew more prominent throughout the series as a replacement for Kenny in Season 6, and later for entering a gay relationship with Craig. Much like with Towley or Timmy, some people may criticize Tweak for not offering much variety in his humor, but we think the character is utilized so well in the show, especially when the writers need an extremely reactive character to represent hysteria happening in our everyday world. Just maybe don't drink his parents' coffee. Any high-strung child like Tweak could use a good counselor to help them out, which is why South Park Elementary, thankfully, has Mr. Mackey, okay?
Staying as your counselor, I'm here to help you with whatever problems you might have, okay?
A mainstay in the show since the first season, Mr. Mackey is a well-meaning character who tries to be there for the kids as much as possible, making him a step above many of the other staff members at the school. He's probably best known for his iconic okay catchphrase, especially in the early seasons where he implemented it in nearly every one of his sentences. As the series has gone on, Mr. Mackey's stayed close to his good-natured roots as we've learned more about his character through glimpses of his family life and childhood. Something we can praise about many characters in South Park is that while they may seem like comic relief at first, Trey Parker really knows how to develop many of them into being much more complex than we initially thought. Mr. Mackey is no exception, and while we may still laugh at many of his antics, we also find him to be an intriguing character who's even more well-rounded than his giant bulbous head. Speaking of characters who have developed over time, our next spot is going to one of our favorite characters in South Park, Jimmy Valmer. Jimmy first appeared in the Season 5 episode Cripple Fight as a rival for Timmy to get jealous of and was intended as a one-off gag. However, since the creators of the show and the fans liked him very much, Jimmy eventually became a mainstay among the rest of the kids as he transitioned into the main cast. While Timmy was initially jealous of Jimmy, the two have developed a strong friendship since then, which has arguably reached the level of strong bond that Stan and Kyle have. Jimmy is one of the more well-intentioned kids in South Park, always trying to make his terrific audience laugh with his many jokes.
Wow, what a terrific audience.
We almost forgot to mention that Jimmy himself is handicapped, but much like Timmy, he never lets his literal crutches get in the way of his good nature. With a few exceptions, like when Jimmy starts abusing steroids. Overall, though, this makes him an inspiration to handicapped children everywhere and one of the greatest characters in the series.
Cool like a fool in a swimming.
With that said though, it's finally time to delve into the S tier. These are the characters we consider to be the absolute pinnacle of the show who best represent why the series is so beloved even to this day. Let's start with the character we miss most out of any in the series, Jerome McElroy, but you probably know him as Chef. Introduced in the first episode of the series, Chef was a huge recurring character in the first 9 seasons of the show. Unfortunately, after South Park went after Scientology, this led to his voice actor quitting the show, resulting in Chef's unfortunate demise in the season 10 premiere.
Pity. He would have made an excellent child molester.
While Mr. Mackey may be the school's counselor, the kids usually were seeking Chef's advice out instead, clearly seeing him as one of the most intelligent characters in the series. Beyond his knowledge, Chef was also defined by his lust for females and singing abilities, both of which were explored on numerous occasions. Really, despite what they ultimately did to his character, brainwashing him into being a predator and murdering him, prior to that, Chef was absolutely part of the heart and soul of the show. His friendship with the boys was always hilarious, but it also bridged the gap between seeing the world through a childhood lens and an adult lens. His heart was always in the right place, and there's no denying that Chef was part of what made early South Park so great. But let's talk about the first of the main cast of boys, Stan Marsh. Based off the personality of South Park's co-creator Trey Parker, Stan in the early seasons was very similar to his best friend Kyle, almost to the point where they were interchangeable. As the series has gone on, Stan has shown himself to be the much more sensitive of the two, as he's often fighting for causes he believes in or having strong emotional reactions like when Wendy breaks up with him or Randy does something ridiculous. Stan in some ways is the everyman of the show, which makes him the perfect grounded character to bounce off all the zaniness happening around him.
Sounds like somebody is shitting in my ears.
While he may not be the funniest character on his own, he is definitely one of the most sympathetic in many instances, making him a great primary character for the show to follow. As much as we love Stan though, we have to say his best friend Kyle Broflovsky slightly edges him out for a higher position. One of the few Jewish kids in South Park, Kyle, as we stated, shares many personality traits with Stan, specifically his good nature and main character energy that make him a great protagonist or deuteragonist for the series depending on your perspective. Kyle, in ways, is a more flawed character than Stan, mostly due to his occasional self-righteous nature and being prone to anger somewhat quickly. In our opinion though, this makes Kyle a more dynamic character, since he's often the one pointing out that he learned something today near the end of many episodes.
I learned something today. You just hate... See? I knew it.
Kyle's rivalry with Cartman is also one of the most iconic dynamics in the show that's led to many great moments due to how polar opposite the characters are in terms of morals and intelligence. Any way you look at it, Kyle is one of the most important characters in the series, making for an easy S-tier rank. Stan, Kyle, and the other students in the class all have one thing in common though, that being their not-so-secret disdain for their teacher, Mr. Herbert Garrison. Another character who's been here from the beginning, Mr. Garrison is considered by many to be one of the most immoral characters in South Park as a whole, especially as an adult. Racist, homophobic, despite being gay, and intolerant in every other way you can imagine.
I am not a good person, period.
Mr. Garrison is one of the most belligerent and vocal adults in the town, which even led to him being the representation of Donald Trump when the businessman ran for and eventually was voted into office. Beyond that, Mr. Garrison has swapped genders twice, has had a bizarre sexual history, and even might have multiple personality disorder if Mr. Hat and Mr. Twig are any indication. He's one of the most complicated, versatile, and downright hilarious characters the show has to offer, and if you don't agree, well...
You go to hell! You go to hell and you die!
As much as we love Mr. Garrison though, our absolute favorite adult character in South Park, hands down, is Randy Marsh. This will come as a surprise to no one, unless you've only watched the first few seasons of the show where Randy was basically nothing more than Stan's dad. As the show's continued, Randy now arguably gets more attention than his main character's son, as the characters become a lot more rambunctious and expressive. Randy is a big fan of hopping on trends, whether that be boy bands, tween wave, becoming a Mormon, World of Warcraft, or getting in fights at baseball games, all of which lead to hilarious results. Randy's become an easy fan favorite over the years, with many citing him as the best character in the entire show. He's narrowly missing out on our top 3 as we feel his Tegrity Farms arc has gone on for just too long, leading to Randy's character going downhill, which even the show's creators acknowledged by naming him Karen.
Karen is a pejorative term for a white person who acts overly entitled and demanding.
That's still not enough to keep him out of our S tier, nor prevent us from calling him our favorite adult character in the town. Moving back to the children, the bronze medal for the best character in South Park is going to Kenny McCormick. Arguably the unluckiest kid in South Park, Kenny in the early days was defined almost entirely by 2 characteristics: his voice, which was muffled by his parka, and the recurring gag of him dying in every single episode. As the series has gone on, Kenny's undergone a lot of development as we've delved into the story behind his immortality, his many heroic deeds, and his very sweet relationship with his sister Karen. Since he can't communicate by normal means, at least with the audience, Kenny's become a very layered and and mysterious character, hence his vigilante persona Mysterion, which he uses to protect people and uncover secrets about his past. This is probably the best example we can think of when it comes to a character starting out as a repeating gag, only to be given much more depth as the show's continued. All this awards Kenny the bronze medal, even if we'll almost definitely have to give it to him posthumously. If there's one kid in South Park that could potentially match Kenny in terms of bad luck, that would be our holder of the silver medal, Leopold Stotch, but you probably know him as Butters.
Hello, I'm Butters.
Originally a background character in the first few seasons, Butters was eventually given a voice and personality in season 3, which has only been expanded upon since then. Butters is someone you could describe as innocent to a fault, as he's defined by his naive, upbeat, and innocent nature, which leads him to often be manipulated easily by other characters. Whether it's having a ninja star thrown in his eye, being almost killed by his own mother, being locked in a bunker for over a week, or an assortment of other traumatizing events, anything and everything seems to be out for this poor kid. As much as we love Butters, we do have to admit that seeing him go through these events is pretty hysterical, and at the end of the day, it never diminishes Butters' perpetually positive attitude.
Well, yeah, and I'm sad. But at the same time, I'm really happy that something can make me feel that sad.
Even if his prominence might have been later in the series, Butters is a very lovable character who we laugh at, sympathize with, and easily award the silver medal. With all that covered, it must be a huge mystery as to who we could possibly rank above all those guys. Who are we kidding? You already knew before clicking on this video that the gold medal is going to Eric Cartman. Whenever someone utters the words South Park, we're willing to bet the first thing that comes to mind is the fat, angry, anti-Semitic kid who is the driving force of many of the show's conflicts.
I'm not fat, I'm festively plump.
A bratty, spoiled child who feels entitled to everything, Cartman is essentially the personification of evil in the form of a small child. Well, not so small. Despite how horrible he is, Cartman has been the most popular and recognizable character on the show since its inception, as his aggressive and manipulative characteristics have made for some of the best moments in the series, or out of any cartoon in existence. As such, we're almost obligated by reputation alone to award Cartman with the gold medal in this video.